Hey YouTubers, I'm back. It's been a while with the Aurora, and I have a video to show you on how to change the power steering rack, and also some subframe bushings, and also both the high pressure and the return lines, because they're all 20 years old on this car, and the rubber is pretty disintegrated. So this is what it looks like underneath the car. And I wanted to show the pinch bolt there, up here. You can see that it has two flaps on the side, and then where the bolt goes through, which is like the silverish part, you can see that's where like a half circle will be on the stub shaft. So you have to make sure you line that properly up. And I have the steering wheel locked right now, so it can't move. And to get that boot off, I wiggled it up with my fingers and I was able to pop it off. It was pretty easy. There's no clamp or anything. What's here? So this would be a perfect time to change the rear transmission mount, but mine's okay, so I'm just gonna leave it. There's one bolt hole for the rack. The other bolt hole for the rack is here. I have the sway bar lowered right now. Both of the bushings are removed. That's pretty much it for down here. This is the new return line that I squeezed in there. It does have a retaining clip that goes up in here on the frame. You can access it once you get the heat shield off of the rack, which I can show you how that mounts in a second. When I was under here, I noticed the subframe bushings, these ones in particular, were bad, so I changed that out while I was in here. To remove the sway bar bushings, there's the holder bolt there, and then the other one goes there. You can see you can move this around pretty easily. I found it pretty difficult to get it completely out, so I just left it in, but I imagine it is possible. These two bolts are 13mm, and you can see there's not a lot of space in here. I unplugged this ABS harness because it was in the way. And to get this out, you do have to drop this corner of the subframe about an inch. You can lower it more if you don't want to fight with it, but in order to get the rack out, the stub shaft would be pointing up when you drop it. So you'll have to lift it out of these hangers. So you lift it up, and then with the stub shaft being my finger, I angled it towards the transmission, and then I was able to just slide it right out. And honestly, I almost got it out without lowering the frame, but I literally only had it lowered an inch. If you lower it more, it should be a piece of cake, because it honestly wasn't that tight. The hardest part is the mounting stub, like the mounting area kind of hits on this frame rail here. I don't know if you can see in there. Probably not. Too dark. But there's a retaining nut for these bushings, and I snapped the other one on the other side, so because it was so rusted coming out. But luckily there's I believe it's a 7/8 nut in there that you could hold with a wrench if you do break it off, and I could put the bolt back in that way. This one is good enough to reuse. Let's see. This is a new steering line. So if you buy one for a 99 Aurora, it's not gonna fit. You have to get like one for a 2001 Aurora or like a 2001 Seville Cadillac, because for some reason the parts catalogs give you a 98 Aurora, which has a different front engine mount, and it's not gonna work. It's like not even close. I could show you that in a second. I wanted to show how you get this return line in, because it was a pain, especially with this one being solid. The original one has a rubber hose that runs this length, so it's easier to get that out, except for the top part of it gets stuck. So what I did to get this in is you kind of angle the front of it in, and then you'll have to put this underneath the axle shaft, and you'll kind of have to like angle it in this way and push it all the way back and end. And then once you get that in, this will be sticking out way out here. Then you could feed this back through. And this is a lot easier. I had to lower this part of the frame. And you could take all three of these bushings loose, and it's not gonna really fall on you necessarily because the engine mounts are gonna hold it. But I left this bolt in a little bit. These two I had completely out, and you'll have to do that to get the bushing in, because you need the space to clear above it. But anyway, once you drop this like 2 or 3 inches, it becomes a lot easier to clear the ABS module right here, because the bends in the lines will pinch here and on the engine. You'll kind of have to push it and fight with it like inch by inch to get it in there. This performance engine mount is still holding up great, by the way. It's been in for a little over 2 years now. You can see the way this bend goes. This is supposed to be down here on the side of the frame like this, but it's not buttoned up yet, so it's kind of just wherever it wants to go at this point. This U part kind of goes up to vent by the radiator. And then it has originally there was a mounting tab right here that goes sideways, but I had a hard time lining that up because this line was not perfectly bent like my old one, so I'm probably not going to use that retaining clip, but this one definitely lined up. And you can see it goes on the side of the rail, and this one comes up. And then you have the hose part going up in here by the alternator. The original one has different bends than this line, but it's the only line that they make that will work, so I went with it. This is the hardest part, if you ask me, getting this upper hose up through the alternator area, because it is extremely tight, and the angle of the fan assembly like really inhibits you from pushing it in there. But if you fight with it enough, you can get it in there. And the only thing I don't know yet is the upper bends are different. For this line, it's much more straight than the original, so I'm gonna see how I can route it, or if I have to bend it to get it in there. And then this piece goes up here. And the high pressure load line was not fun either. So the original one has like a threaded nut that goes into this block, and you could unthread that with 2 wrenches. It's pretty tight, so you're gonna need some leverage, but you can break it loose. And if you disconnect this, it's really easy to pull it out. And just make sure you reuse this mounting tab, because it doesn't come with a new one. This is where the power steering pressure sensor goes. I have a piece of tape over it, and you can just pop that off with a wrench. It wasn't too hard. And this is the wiring harness for it. And the power steering also has a separate wire harness right there, the rack I mean. This bushing I was fighting with for a while now. I finally got it out. So in order to get this high pressure line in, which goes on the top of the pump here, wait, the sun is not helping me out here. Oh, okay, so here is where the high pressure line goes into the pump, and it's It's like a 16mm nut here. Just make sure you change the O-rings. Alright, so here's where the line goes. And if you can see down in there, that is the torque axis engine bracket. And it runs through the middle of it, and then right next to the crankshaft pulley. And then it goes underneath the bracket, and you can see the little hole for that mounting tab underneath there. And the head of the bolt goes from underneath, so I find it's easier to get it from under the car. This car is an 8mm. I think the 98s and older are 10. I had to use a lot of extensions to get at it. And I put this in, so I started from the engine and put the lower rack piece of the line in first through that area. And I actually had to remove half of the torque axis mount bracket to get it in there, because there's not enough room with the bends in the line to fit it in there. And the replacement line I got is all one piece, so I couldn't unthread that lower piece, so that wasn't an option. So I had to figure out how to get it in there. And I removed this 13mm lower bolt completely, and that makes the bracket pop out about an inch, which will give you about another inch of clearance. And I also took this bolt out that goes through there, which is a 15. I took that, I would say, almost all the way out. I would say it was in maybe just a few turns, just so I didn't have to pull it all the way out, because the engine was already hanging by the subframe. And I put a jack with a block of wood underneath it also to support the engine while I did it. But it didn't really shift at all, just in case it came off, because the torque axis rubber here will hold it for you if you don't take it all the way off. But the bracket starts to pivot, and it might come out of alignment if you take too many bolts out. I had to remove this also because it was in my way. I also took this nut off till it was about flush on the pulley down there. And then I also broke this one like about to the flush, and it pretty much pivots the whole bracket towards the frame, and you could angle it. You could take a pry bar if you need to. I think I used it while I was pulling the line through to give me enough room. But yeah, I did that, and then I was just able to put all the bolts back in and tighten them, and I didn't have to remove the whole mount, so it saved me a little bit of time. I cut this line off of the old one just so I could flush the pump fluid. And then you could kind of see the way this hose routes up through there. It goes like under all these wiring harnesses, and these are my replacement brake lines, so yours probably won't look this messy, but oh, that's it. And it goes right into the rack. I believe the nuts on the rack are 18mm, and it is tight in there. So with the sway bar lowered though, it's definitely a lot easier. I would say it's pretty much impossible to get it out without taking the sway bar loose. So I couldn't decide which rack to buy because they all seem like junk these days. So I ended up going with the Rack Doctor. And I mean, it looks pretty nice. The one thing that kind of tweaked me about it is this boot is not even close to this one. I don't know why they use two different boots. I'm assuming they just didn't have another one, but I kind of didn't really like that. I believe this one came centered, so you don't really have to mess with it. This bend was rubbing on here, so I bent it a little bit and half the paint came off, but I didn't want it rubbing on here. It's just a breather tube, but I don't know. That's not how the original one was, so it was bugging me. Let's see. So, just to make sure it was centered, I put a line right where the mounting bolt goes through. And then when I took it all the way to the stops, it stopped here, and then like 2 1/4 rotations, it stopped where the other line is. So instead of counting the turns, you can just really spin it one whole rotation and then put it in between these 2 dots instead of trying to guess what 1/8 of a turn is. And that's how I centered it. So the old one actually had more play in it. So this is the original one. You can see the boots are kind of both look like that one. You can see the breathing line has different bends in it, but it's not the end of the world. I can tell this rack was bad because I pulled this boot off and the fluid just poured on me, and it gave symptoms of like a bad inner tie rod. So the inner section on the tire was wearing pretty bad. So I originally thought it was inner tie rust, but I was rocking the wobbling the wheel side to side with the wheels off the ground, and I like really pushed on it. I could hear metal clanking, and when I went to do the inner tie rods, because I still thought it was inner tie rods, pulled this boot on and I could tell it was the rack, unfortunately. This is a mounting nut for the heat shield, and the other part of the heat shield goes there. And it's like these tiny 10mm bolts right here. These are the sway bar bushing bolts, 13. These are the retaining nuts, which are at 10 for the hose, the power steering hoses. These are the rock bolts. I believe they're an 18. And that was that 8mm for the hose. Yeah, these sway bar bushings were really bad. So this was the inner part of the bushing. It came out with the bolt, which is not supposed to happen. And you can see this rubber is just disintegrated. And let's see. I couldn't get the new bushings in because this area wasn't even close. And I realized that this part of it like separated, and it was up inside on the subframe, and I couldn't tell if it was the subframe metal until I grinded this out, and then it was starting to separate here. And I was like, So then I started tapping it with a hammer, and it popped all of this out, because you can't see up in here from underneath. It just looks like a mess. So I was never going to get the new one in with this in there. So make sure that this isn't hanging up on you. You can tell pretty easily if there's any rubber chunks hanging off the side, or if you can't get the new one in, obviously there must be. I thought it was just rust that I had to grind off to get it in. But yeah, no, it was actually half the bushing was still in. So there's that. So the inner tie rod, this is a 13 on the flats, and then 7/8 for the nut over there. And make sure you count the turns on the outer when you take it off if you're reusing it. So the Rack Doctor one does come with new outer tie rods for free. It's about what you would expect for free, I would say, in quality. But if I had to, I probably would use them, but I would say the Moog is much better. So this is what you get. The interesting thing is the boot comes with little wires that secure it, which is I've never seen before. It comes with a washer. You can see this nut. Honestly, I didn't even want to use it because it's like half the. I was like, ooh, I could use these nuts, and then I looked at it and I was like, what the hell? It's like half the thickness, and I was like, if I put a wrench on that, it's barely gonna grab it. So I was able to find these grade 8s at a hardware store because I kind of banged up the flats or some of the corners around it, getting it off because it was seized pretty bad. I can't even get this nut off with an impact that's on there. But this nut for these inner tie rods is a M14 by 1.5 fine thread, and this is a grade 8.8 metric. So if you're trying to find it at the hardware store, I believe that's what size it is. I had to go to a specialty hardware store because Home Depot never has them. So there's that. And there's flats on the stub shaft to center it. You just take a 9/16 and you pop it on here and you just turn it side to side. Like I said, it was about 2 1/4 turns from lock to lock. And if you just put a line where the lock is on one reference on the stub, you can just put it in between it instead of dividing by 2. I find it easier. This was the original sway bar rubbers, which I'm gonna reuse because I don't know why, but everything I go to order off Rock Auto does not work. So I ordered one that said it fit a 99 Aurora, and you can tell that this doesn't even look anything like this. I mean, it's got like this U shape to it, and I tried putting it in here and it's not even close to fitting, so this must be from like a 98 Aurora, I'm guessing, like everything else, so it doesn't fit. This is the power steering fluid I'm using because whatever the manual called for doesn't exist anymore. And I bought about three jugs of this, so I'm gonna use maybe a jug to flush it, probably not the whole thing. And then it takes, the manual said it takes 1.5 quarts to fill the whole system, so we'll see. This is the hose part number that I ended up ordering, and this one is probably the cheapest, and it came with that mounting tab, but I don't know if it's gonna line up. So these were the original, and you can see the long, this one, the long rubber hose that replaced that steel section on the driver's side. And then the original one, which I cut to get it out because it was, I cut it right here. There's a mounting tab here, and there's up here. So one on the upper alternator section and one on the lower that holds it in, bolt 15. And here's the first line I ordered that was on Rock Auto, and it said it fit. But that's clearly for a 98 Aurora because both of these go out the passenger side, and this pretty much hit the front engine mount on the 99, so it's like not even close. I ended up taking the rubber hoses off of here because I was going to use them.